Well, why are we here today? We're here in part because we love books. And I'm going to revisit something that used to be done at the Daily Journal. When I was the editor of the Daily Journal, we had a process. We had official journal book reviewers because publishers would send piles of books to the newspaper in hopes that you would write about them and increase the sales. So I had a gimmick that we would give the book to anybody who wanted to read it. And so if you read the book, we gave you a bookmark. You were an official Daily Journal book reviewer, and then we would publish a review. And I still have a handful of these left, so if somebody wants a Daily Journal book reviewer bookmark, I'll gladly give you one. I was very conscious over the years that journalism is the first draft of history. In fact, I have an old t-shirt with that tucked somewhere back in a closet. And when I was writing about stuff, and I still write about a lot of stuff in the community, it's important to me in this sense. If you cover an event in a big city, if you go to Chicago and you're covering an event, chances are you're one of a dozen reporters there between the radio, the television, and the other newspapers. In a town our size, if you go to cover an event, you are likely the only journalist there. And so it always is important to me. I will write the only account of this activity that goes down in posterity. So it's important for me to get it right. And I still, after writing about things from 60 years, there will be times up at night, I wonder to myself, did I get it right? And was I kind enough to everybody? So that's important. Journalism and history. I say the 3 L's are important. The 3 L's. What are the 3 L's? The first is listening. The key skill is to listen to others. And I see a lot of television interviews that are really bad. Any interview you watch on TV, if the guy asking the questions or the gal asking the questions is on the air more than the person answering the questions, that's not right. Your job is to get the information from the person who knows it, not to pretend that you know all the information. Listening. Second L, learning. You have to be able to go into a situation where you don't know a heck of a lot about it and learn as you go along. Just yesterday, I did interviews for 2 stories. One was on a farmer for a Thank a Farmer series, and this farmer had a U-pick flower garden. You paid a fee, you went onto this farmer's property, you took some snips, and you cut your own flowers. I'd never heard of that. They're making a living doing it. And I also went to the Kankakee Speedway to write about people who race cars at the Kankakee Speedway. Those are both topics that before yesterday, my knowledge was very little, and now I know enough, or at least I know a lot more than I did once. And the third L, I say, is looking up. If somebody tells you something, double check if you can at all double check. There was a famous sign sent once in the newsroom of the Detroit News that said, if your mother says she loves you, double check it.
How about your wife?
That would be true too. I want to make a couple points about history. Because again, we're all here because we love history. The first is that history must be paid attention to or else it gets forgotten. You think it's there forever and it's not there forever. Unless you pay attention to it and repeat it and learn it, it passes away. A couple examples in our community. We have a Little League field in Kankakee, which is Beckman Park. Now before it was Beckman Park, it was Waterman Park. And the Watermans were famous because they were in the fountain pen industry. There's a little like beehive rock formation, and on the front of that rock over there once was a plaque for Waterman Park. Somebody stole the plaque years ago and it's never been replaced. Same thing happened a few years ago in the village of Bradley. There was a big rock, and the rock commemorated Harris Darsh. And you say to yourself, who the heck was Harris Darsh? Harris Darsh was a Marine chaplain during World War I, one of the most decorated chaplains in the history of the country. and he was one of the founding persons for the American Legion. At any rate, there was a big rock, and there was a plaque to him, and a few years ago, somebody stole the plaque. I don't know if the plaque has been replaced or not. I'll give you another example. One of the persons who died in Kankakee was Rube Foster. And again, Rube Foster is not a household name these days. But Rube Foster, in the days before Jackie Robinson, was the best known African American in baseball. There was a time, half a century ago, if you said African Americans in baseball, Rube Foster came to mind. He died at the Kankakee State Hospital, which is now Shapiro. If you are a White Sox fan, and you go up to what is today called Guaranteed Rate Field, which used to be Comiskey Park, and you turn off on 39th Street, which is Pershing Drive, to get into the ballpark parking lot. As you turn left, you look over your right-hand shoulder, and there is a bus stop that is dedicated to Rube Foster and the Chicago American Giants, who were the Negro League team in Chicago. That they put, every year they put it up. Every year, quite sadly, somebody or different people who don't know anything about it vandalize it. Again, we must pay attention to history or we forget it. The second point about history is that not everyone thinks it's valuable. I am tremendously aware that history is not everybody's cup of tea. A story out of this book, which is for sale at the library, not at the library, at the museum. Misspeak. I'm at a museum event maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So a guy comes up to me, "You're Phil Angelo." Okay, I'll shake hands. He introduces himself, and I recognize his name immediately, which I will not repeat. And I say, "Your father is in the book." Okay. Your father is in the book, and the book is right over there. How can I find it? And I said, the book is indexed in the back. You should be able to find it immediately. Fellow goes over, carefully picks up the back, goes to the index, looks up his father, turns to the page, and I can tell he's reading it because he's standing there for a while, carefully reads the entire item, closes the book back up, puts it on the shelf without buying it. History is not everybody's cup of tea, and we have to recognize that. Another point is that written history is different than visual history. Today we live in a world where you can call up almost anything on your phone, your laptop, or your computer within seconds, and you have an image. If it's something before the days of images, it just doesn't register with the public. I'll tell you the story of Sam Rice. Sam Rice is the best baseball player you've never heard of. He is in the Hall of Fame. Sam Rice was from Iroquois County. When Sam Rice was a relatively young man, a tornado came through Iroquois County, and the tornado killed his wife, all of his children, his mother, and his father. He became a very reclusive individual, joined the Navy, and then later, at like 25 or 26, got back into baseball. If you've seen the movie The Natural with Robert Redford, part of that was the Sam Rice story. And anyway, during the 1925 World Series, Rice is playing right field for the Washington Senators. And he is the only man in history who was on all three Washington Senators pennant-winning teams. He goes back during the course of the game, man hits a fly ball, he goes back, jumps up, catches the ball and falls into the stands. It is widely viewed by a number of experts as the greatest catch in baseball history. There's no film of it whatsoever, not even a picture. So it's one of those things that's forgotten to history, unless you're really studying, unless you're a reader. Another point about history is that history changes. We think of history as never changing. History changes. When I was a young man, John Adams was the one-term president between Washington and Jefferson. Not really well regarded in history. Today, that has flipped around. Adams has been steadily rising in the view of historians, and Jefferson and even Washington have been steadily declining. Why? Because they are slaveholders. At one time, that was perhaps more acceptable than it is today. But each generation reinterprets history according to the way our culture changes. I wanted to say a little bit about writing too. Writing is a solitary process. And I used to manage a large number of writers at the newspaper. And I would go around in the morning and I would say, what are you working on? And if somebody said, I'm doing this, 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 and this, I didn't care what it was, I just left them alone. And there were other people you go up and say, what are you working on? I don't know. Nothing seems interesting to me. And those are the people I worried about the most. Then, of course, I always had a list, and I would give them 2 or 3 things to do. And that just upset them anyway. But you have to stick to it. People who really write for a living don't wait for an inspiration, they just do it. They just stick with it all the time. Now, a couple of words here. I brought my 3 books with me. The first is 150 Years, the Daily Journal Sesquicentennial Celebration. And this is a book that was done in 2003 for the 150th anniversary of Kankakee and Kankakee County. It is very hard to find today. All the copies have been sold out. I'm not aware of any place that you can actually buy the book. And it's 150 short stories. I really enjoyed it. What we would do is we would run 1 story a day in the paper for about half a year, and then collect them in the book. And we had a little form. You could fill out the form and send it in, and then we would sell you a book. And then in 2010, or 7 years after that, we did another 100 stories called 100 Minutes of Area History. And a few copies of this are still for sale here. It's the only place I'm aware of that there are a few copies to sell. And there is talk now, and I'm not sure it will get done or not, but there's talk that the Daily Journal will do another book to commemorate 120 years, because this year is the 120th year of the Small family owning the Daily Journal. So they talk that they will do a book. I don't know if that's for sure or not. Jack has talked to me a little bit about it. And so Jack may want to do the book. Jack and I may do the book. I will only do the book alone if Jack doesn't have the time to do it. But there's talk like another book like that will come out. And one of my odd interests here is, because I have many odd hobbies, my wife knows this, I'm a devotee of Sherlock Holmes, okay, created by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and I am actually a president of a Sherlock Holmes club, so, which meets on the south side of Chicago. We meet once a month. So this book is actually, there are 60 official Sherlock Holmes stories written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And this book is a piece of poetry, a toast to each one of the 60 stories, because each month we do a story. So if you're in the club for 5 years, at the end of 5 years, you've got them all. And this is a book. We have the poem about the case, we have an illustration, and we have a passage about the case. And I still have a handful of these left. I think I have 8 total. So if you are a Sherlock Holmes devotee, I will gladly sell you a book. It's $19.83, which is my cost. And that also is a labor of love, which is another true thing, I think, of local authors and local history books. It's great to do. It's positive for the community to do. You want the book to stick around to establish something. You do not become rich doing this, am I correct? And I still love to write. I still love to interview people. I still love to write stories. I think it makes retirement tolerable. Listening to people tell, and virtually everybody I think has an interesting story. And interviewing them is great. And I also give presentations on, usually about Kankakee County history. I have a presentation about Kankakee County and baseball, a presentation about Kankakee ghost stories, and a presentation about Kankakee County and the presidents, which I just gave last week for the Triad Senior Citizens Group. And I'll end with one story about that. Al Smith. Now, Al Smith was the 1928 Democratic candidate for president. And he holds a little bit of a place in Kankakee County history. Of all the elections in Kankakee County history, there has been only one election where the Democrat got a higher percentage of the vote in Kankakee County than he did in the nation as a whole. He didn't win. He didn't win. This is not about who won or lost. He did better here than in the nation as a whole. And Al Smith did that in 1928 for a couple of reasons. One, he was the first Catholic to be nominated for a major party. And at that point, before Olivet had purchased the current Olivet Nazarene University, the Catholic vote was very important in Kankakee County. Also, Smith was a wet. He was against prohibition. He was for having a drink. And that was also very popular in Kankakee County. It was having a drink. Now, Smith was the governor of New York and a man who had come up through the school of hard knocks. He had sold fish at the Fulton Fish Market. He had hawked newspapers as a young man. And he was the type of politician you went to if there was a pothole on the street and you needed it fixed. That was Al Smith. He didn't think in big terms. He thought of, this is the street light that needs fixed. This is the place that needs a police patrol. Well, anyway, the story goes like this. Al Smith was at Sing Sing prison in New York. And in the days before Alcatraz, Sing Sing prison was the nation's toughest prison. You did not want to be sent to Sing Sing, which is in Ossining, New York. So Smith was visiting, as governors wind up doing, they visit state facilities. And the warden asked him to say a few words to the assembled inmates. So here are the inmates at the lunch table. Al Smith gets up. He doesn't quite know how to start, so he says, first he starts, he goes, "My fellow citizens." Then he thought for a minute that those convicted of felony, you lost some of your citizenship rights. So then he restarted and he goes, "My fellow prisoners." And then he said, well, that wasn't quite right either. So third time's the charm, and he restarted, he goes, "Well, anyway, I'm so glad to see so many of you here today." Okay, thank you much.